Welcome to the Spoilercast for Rehydrate. This episode will contain spoilers for all of the Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End. If you don't want to be spoiled on future events, please skip this episode. This is Season 5, Episode 2, The Swordholders, where we will be discussing the first half of Part 2 of Death's End by Lucy Shin. My name is Amin, and I've only read up to the current reading.
Hey, this is Dan. I've read the entire series.
Hey, this is Thalia. I've been reading and rereading this series along with the podcast.
And together with the Spoilercast, like I mentioned on the main show, we also have an interview series where I just did an interview with the translator for some of Lucy Shin's other works, including The Village Teacher and Cannonball. And his name is Adam. And it is up on the feed currently, so I encourage everyone to listen to it. And Thalia, I know you said you retracted your statement, but I don't know if you had thoughts that you want to talk about it.
I thought that Adam was a phenomenal interview. Hey, Adam, if you're listening, it's surprising people have not been knocking down your door to interview you before. I thought you were very composed and gave very considered answers, because we, read these translations and think Flintstones, I don't know, maybe they goofed. And you give us just a lot more nuance and depth into understanding this work and the way it interacts with the people who read it. So that was really interesting. I tried to come up with an answer for the Gok Turks, but I think you and I did the same research on inter-Asian groups, and we can't get away from that translation. So I had to retract my statement. So if any of that is usable, feel free to keep it in.
Seeing as he hasn't read any of the Remembrance of First Pass series, I don't think he's going to be listening to the Spoilercast, but we can pass it along now.
I will add that I do think that this was one of the I've liked all the interview series, of course, but I thought this one was one of the ones where I learned the most, just because it was coming at this from such a different perspective. So even if you are, I know Adam's not listening, but for others, I would definitely, even if you've been skipping the interview series, this was definitely one you should check out. It's really great.
Cool, thanks. All right, well, let's jump into the brief summary for this episode. So we start out with the Bronze Age getting tricked into coming back and getting put on trial. Changxin is shot by Wade because he wants to be a swordholder. Gravity encounters strange phenomena in space. Changxin gets elected as swordholder, and Luoji is awesome. And an apparent droplet attack in the final 15 minutes of Changxin's reign as the swordholder ends the chapter. So Thalia, I know you and I discussed previously that you really enjoy the Bronze Age chapter, so maybe you can kick us off and start talking about why you like that section so much.
Yeah, so it's just another example, which this novel gets more into, of the diversity in style that we see in this final, or third if you count anything beyond 3 as part of the series, in this third book of The Remembrance of Earth's Past, which opened with us dropped in the middle of Constantinople, and now we're in like a court drama in which we are hearing about people thinking they're returning home as heroes, and they've of course been living the last lives as humanity in space for like 3 decades, which humankind as of right now has never ventured to try, and they're trying to come home, and it's just like a whole nother world encapsulated in this tiny chapter, and I think it's pretty artful.
Yeah, I like that section too. I think Tim brought up a good point that he liked it because it it's the people's mindset. He likes the stories of people's mindset and when they go into space and how they change. And like this is a really good example of that. And I also personally thought it was really interesting, like how humanity is looking for maybe revenge on them, but like they're more worried that like they don't want these people representing humanity outside, because like they're worried that the Translands are going to destroy Earth at any time, right? So they don't want these people who they don't consider even to be human anymore to represent us in the far reaches of space.
It's a weird little mental gymnastics that they consider them not human, but then they don't want them to represent humanity. But aren't they not human? So problem solved.
Well, I think they think that like, okay, so they think that the people on the ship still think they're human and will say, hey, we're humans from the Earth, but we also eat people and kill other people for resources. So like that's not the best foot forward for humanity, probably. That they take these pretty dramatic measures to bring them back. All this gigantic ruse to like bring all those crowds in place to say like, oh, you guys are heroes now.
It's no cost if the prize is human dignity.
Yeah.
So does I might have been the only one who was less impressed by this section, mostly because it just seemed to. I mean, it connects to the story, but it didn't seem to tie to the core plot of anything. So, do we come back to this at all, or is this just kind of a standalone section?
So we don't come back to the Bronze Age at all, but it's more. It's kind of setting up I think the major thing that it's setting up. Well, there's two things. There's one is like just humanity's reaction to what happens to people who might go into the far reaches of space. But two is also setting up blue space, which does like have a huge part in the story going forward. So if you remember at the very end of the chapter, the guy from Bronze Age goes and sends a warning to blue space to not come back. Right. That's the major. That's the plot thing that drives it forward. But it's just more kind of world building and like just more human psychology that he's like building in there to show like what both humanity's reaction to this happening and also like what people on the ship would do. Like they were just fine. Like, oh yeah, of course we hate the people. Like, what are you gonna yeah, they're there. Like, we're not just gonna throw them away. We need food. They're there. We're gonna eat them. So it's a interesting twist.
I also have a small bit of foreshadowing if you want to connect this to the future events of this novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be on the theme of fish. And the very final part of the interview, the trial, is the captain saying, I don't have much to say except a warning. Life reached an evolutionary milestone when it climbed onto land from the ocean, but those first fish that climbed onto land ceased to be fish. And yeah, that interaction of fish and what they do when they encounter dry land, that does actually carry on.
I think the part with the ring also talks about fish, if I remember right, too. And then
that's exactly what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, but then there's all the stuff with the fish in the gluttonous sea, right? So there's lots of
I don't think about the glutton sea. I think specifically just about the ring. The ring saying all the fish who are in this puddle will die. The fish who dried the sea are gone. Like they changed themselves. They ceased to be fish at all, and they ceased to be humanity. And that's what the captain is trying to warn them about. And of course, they just convict him of murder. So I don't know if that will salvage this section for you, Amin. But fortunately, this is a bigger part than just this one chapter, because a lot more happened.
Yeah, a lot happened. I mean, I think like this is I think this section of the book that we kind of segmented out here, like is a lot of like kind of, there's a lot of building, like place setting and getting stuff in place, like getting people familiar with like what the Swordholder was, what deterrence is, like how humanity and Trisolaris are at, quote unquote peace now. It's just another example of humanity just being super arrogant and naive and be like, that's where we're cool with the Trisolarians now. Like we're friends, they're sharing technology, it's no problem, we're good. So like this is Spoilercast, so that's not the last time humanity is going to have a false sense of security. And Amin, you had a question about the meaning of Australia, and I didn't want to spoil it on the main podcast, but it is about the country or the continent Australia and the country too, I guess. So you can imagine, like I think like it's set up pretty well that like something's going to happen, and at the end of this chapter, that they say like the droplet attacks are coming, and Changxin, it only has a reign of being Swordholder for 15 minutes, right? So we know something's coming. So what's coming is the Trisolarians are going to attack America, or not America, the Earth. They're going to attack the entire Earth, and then they let them live, but they make them all. They do a forced relocation to Australia for the entire population of the Earth, and it doesn't go well. But it's a very interesting chapter. And Sofan really changes too, which I think is also, she turns into like this crazy military person. It's a pretty big change for her.
No more tea ceremonies.
Doesn't she have another one afterwards?
I mean, during the Great Resettlement.
Right, yeah. Definitely the tea, way of tea is off the table during the Great Resettlement. So yeah, did that answer your question, Amin?
Yeah, that answered the question.
So I'm pretty sure all that stuff happens in the next section. I know it definitely starts happening, if I remember right.
Oh, just a few pages away, I believe.
Yeah.
Because we ended our section with the end of deterrence.
Right. Yeah. So now we go into post-deterrence era, and that's the greatest element to Australia. But that doesn't last very long because eventually, they activate deterrence from gravity, and then the Trisolaris gets destroyed because of that, and the Trisolaris just kind of give up.
Well, that's another fake out because AA does say we still have gravity, and Sophon tells her that gravity has been destroyed. So for the first time, something happens that Trisolaris does not seem to know about, which ends up being quite interesting.
Well, they talk about the droplets being in a Sophon free zone, so maybe they're just lying. I think maybe they just assume it's getting destroyed, right? Because they set the motion, they set the plan in motion, right? And so like the droplets do attack, but they're able to disable the droplets, and that's another cool thing.
But they don't know that it failed.
Right.
Rare Trisolaran arrogance, I guess.
So let's put Amin on the spot again. How do you think that the humans can destroy the droplets, the 2 droplets that are there, or disable them? There's a clue in the text in this section, but I think it's really almost impossible.
How could he guess this?
I know. There's like you'll when you tell you'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Maybe.
Well, I have no idea, so you can just tell me.
It's not by them turning into ghosts and like entering the quantum realm, if that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, nothing to do with ball lightning.
Yeah.
So you'll remember in this section, and this becomes probably the most hard to wrap your head around stuff around the entire
Are you sure you want to
series.
spoil it in this section? Do you want to spoil it in this episode?
Because
I don't know. It's like 400 pages away. That's all.
Is it? Is that
if memory serves?
Don't we start getting into? Well, I think the droplets are destroyed in the next chapter or in the next section, though.
And explained. Okay, well, yeah, maybe now's a good time then.
Because we definitely get into the ring. The ring is definitely the next chapter.
Yeah, so maybe it is a good time.
Yeah, I forget the exact order. I'll give you a brief overview. I won't spoil everything, but basically, the weird phenomena that we're seeing, that gravity was seeing in the outside the Oort cloud is like. Actually, Tim got it. Actually, it's 4-dimensional pockets that just happen to kind of show up just around, right? And that's what showed up in Constantinople too. And actually, I was worried that I spoiled it because, like, when I was talking about it on the main show, I kind of connected Constantinople to the stuff that's happening out there, and I was like, "Oh, damn it! Did I just give it away?" But hopefully not. Hopefully it's vague enough where people aren't gonna put it together. But anyway, so like the stuff the weird stuff that's happening on gravity is all 4-dimensional pockets, and that's why they can kind of see through walls and they can see into that girl that he's really like stalking or whatever. And the micrometeorites are happening because they're going through there. But the crew on the blue space is actually able to utilize those 4-dimensional pockets, and they use them to destroy the Trisolaran probes. Or just disable them. I don't think they need to actually destroy them, if I remember right. So how close were you?
Nowhere near.
Yeah. So I think this is, and it's, even when you read it, it's going to be like, what is going on? Because then they meet like beings that live within the 4-dimensional stuff, and they talk in weird metaphors, and it's going to be difficult to understand. It's still difficult to understand. And not to mention that, but like film. I don't know how in the world they're going to do that.
What I really like about the way that Cixin Liu talks about 4-dimensional space is that he doesn't go all or nothing. Like when other science fiction authors sort of talk about other dimensions, it's sort of either, yes, you can live there and you're completely unaffected because it works for my plot for you to just walk through these different dimensions and observe quirky things, or you can't live there and if you enter there, you die. And Cixin Liu actually thinks about, well, what it would be like if something from a lower dimension entered a higher dimension. What we think of as like inside our bodies and outside would be completely exposed. So yeah, you can go through and your spacesuit will still help you breathe, but a meteoroid could just as easily hit your innards as the spacesuit. It just depends like which angle it comes in at. And it's interesting if you read this for the hard science, or even if you don't, frankly.
Yeah, I when I was reading it the first time, I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember if I fully understood. Like, I definitely didn't understand during the Constantinople part that it was a 4-dimensional fragment that would cause her to be able to pull that guy's brain out or whatever. But I don't remember how quickly it took me, or how long it took me to pick up that it was when it was like looking into the other woman, and he's like seeing like the insides of her, that if I picked up as a 4-dimensional fragment. It's just
Again,
weird space. Yeah,
do you reveal that? It's very hard to imagine that visualized on film.
Totally. The only time that people I've even remember trying to visualize 4-dimensional stuff is the Tesseract and Interstellar, right? Like where they're trying to do the library. And thinking back on it, like when I first saw that part, it was like seemed pretty silly, but like it's pretty interesting representation of how you would represent 4-dimensional space, right? It's like all possible points are represented. It's kind of interesting, I guess.
Mathematicians always like to talk about higher dimensions by first schooling you in lower dimensions and just saying, all right, just imagine going from 2 to 3, and then we'll talk about going up, because it's the same principle, but it's hard to think about.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to recommend Flatland a lot to the podcast, but I also don't want to spoil it by recommending Flatland. like I don't know if it's a spoiler to recommend it, but it's really, really good. Or the Carl Sagan video too, which I'm sure you've seen, Thalia. Maybe I've even talked to you about it. Those two things, like, and he talks about Flatland in there too.
Flatland is so funny because like it is science fiction, but it also points to like the arrogance. I think it's very funny. If you're listening to this, you don't mind spoilers. So a 2-dimensional creature, is brought into the world of 3 dimensions and is amazed and learns all these new things and can see inside of what used to be the outsides of his whole universe and his whole life. And he's so excited. He talks to the 3-dimensional creature about 4D, and immediately, and of course, like no one in 2D believes him. They're like, yeah, there's no such thing as 3 dimensions. And even if there was, you couldn't reach it. And then he talks to the sphere like about 4 dimensions, and immediately the 3-dimensional object is just as arrogant. He's like, no, I'm the highest dimension imaginable. There's nothing above me. And it just like repeats all over again.
Yeah.
I actually think we talked about Flatland like in the first or an early episode of season 1. I think
Oh yeah, maybe we did.
Yeah, pretend you're just bringing it back up.
Yeah,
unrelated to anything.
It's already been spoiled for people to read Flatland, so
I didn't want to like bring it back up again in this context because like there's so much dimensionality stuff in this book. Like we go from 1 dimension until 11, I guess. And they talk about the resetting the universe at the end of it, then to 11 dimensions possibly. So yeah, dimensionality is like, I think it was already a big part of it, especially a 3-body problem where they talk about the Sophon, right? But this one is like a much, much grander scale. The next thing I want to talk about was Wade. And I mean, you had a question around it, maybe it was Tim had a question if Wade is going to be a character going forward. And he is going to be a character. He's the foil for Changxin basically going forward, but he's also kind of works with her. She's very forgiving. But she understands, his kind of nature and his way to get things accomplished. And so when she hibernates at some point and kind of gives control of our company over to Wade. And it's later in the book, but yeah, he definitely does play a really big part in the future of the book.
So if he did shoot her, why would she trust him? Like what changes to make that?
Nothing changes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of because of that.
Yeah, I think she from the beginning, she always saw him as like the person who can just get things done no matter what the cost, I guess. Like, and that she understands that she doesn't have that kind of instinct. And so that's why, and I don't know that she can, I don't know that she trusts him. I can't give I don't think there is a really good, like, succinct answer, like why she does it.
Well, he asks her. That's one reason.
Does he
doesn't just decide. He's like, he tells her, like, give me your power, give me your company, give me everything you have. So that's one reason.
But she could have also said no, obviously.
Of course.
Yeah.
And it's telling that when she tells her, her CEO and her friend, AA sort of immediately gets it. It's like, well, he can do this and you cannot. You don't have what it takes, to do this and just be such a bastard for a whole century.
Yeah.
But there must be somebody else who can do that who hasn't tried killing her, I guess.
Yeah.
In the universe.
You would think.
Some other people, like some other candidates for the Swordholder, who you may have already forgotten about, they actually do come back as well. Cao
Yeah.
Bean is a candidate for the Swordholder. He comes back, and one other is as well.
I forgot the other ones. I remember Cao Bean does. I don't remember. There
I
was
think
another
Cao Bean
Chinese
gives
guy.
Chengxin a tour of the bunker world, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they are of consequence to humanity in the future.
Next, I wanted to talk about the foreshadowing we saw. Like, and I thought, I think myself and Amin and everybody thought that part was interesting, where the Trisolarians kind of share our culture, or emulate our culture enough where they're able to make it even like really artistic and share, kind of like have cultural exchange with humanity. And the one of the ones, the thing I picked up on was there was a quote where talking about the movie that they made, and it says the pair was kept apart for the entire film. They never got to see each other, not even in an imaginary scene. So that's really foreshadowing some of the events that are going to happen. So, I mean, big spoiler for the book, but like Chengxin and Yan Ming never actually meet up again in person. Like, they kind of meet up. They have like a, I don't know, I guess like a hologram or something when she talks to him for a little while, and then
Yeah, they
she
have a
almost
pimped
sees
out
him.
Zoom, but they don't get to meet in person.
Yeah. So it's like they just miss each other, and that also happened earlier in the book too,
It's
right?
so
Yeah,
agonizing. It's so close.
and she just misses him when when he dies, and she just misses him when she's on the and later in the book. So this quote I think is very representative, and the reason I bring it up is because if I remember right, one of the plot points in the Redemption of Time, the fan fiction follow up to this book that was not done by the physician, but apparently he was okay with it, and enough where he said it was good, or I don't know. He didn't hate it, I guess. Anyway, so one of the plot points, if I remember right, was that all this culture is actually coming from Bian Tianming himself. So he is maybe already in the hands of the Trisolarians, and he's generating all this stuff, and he's the one that's responsible for all of it. So rereading it again, it seems like that's possible. I don't know if like there's enough in the book to make that leap, but I could see it be possible, especially stuff like this. Like I don't know if he knew that she missed him, but like it's very artistic, and given his ability to generate the fairy tales later on, like we know he has a very gifted storyteller. So I think it's possible.
I think it makes it a weaker novel, to be honest.
You think so?
Yeah, if there's like one great man who's beaming through the stars for 300 instead of a whole civilization that's conspiring to get the best of an enemy that they're fighting for centuries. I don't know, it sort of takes the teeth away from the Trisolarians, but
that's true. That yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's a little bit too convenient, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. Where it's like it's kind of more interesting if like they're able to, based off of these hundreds of years of standing off against humanity, like figure us out enough to like lull us into this false sense of security again. And we just put like a couple movies and some art or whatever, and then people go, oh, they like us, they like humanity now. Thalia, you had some questions, or you had some stuff around the actual poem that the movie was based off of.
Oh yeah, I could shed some light on the poem that the movie they watch is based on. It's this Song Dynasty poem, and if you read it in classical Chinese, which I believe it's probably quoted in classical Chinese in the original version, you can tell that it is from another time. It's written in 5 characters per line, rhyming verse in these short, concise Chinese characters. I didn't really sense that in the English translation, but unlike, Priya, I don't have a degree in English literature. But if you'll indulge me, I will read this 5-line poem. 我举长掌头，君举长掌尾，日日思君不见君，公饮长掌水. So it means that I live at the base of the Yangtze River, and my love for the gentle woman lives at the head. So we live on opposite sides of this long river, and back in the Song Dynasty, that could be as impassable as all of space and time. Like you'll actually never meet just because you're separated by that distance.
So do you think this could lend even more credence to that it's Yun Tianming? I mean, like the idea that like you live at one end of the river and I live at the other end, like that could be.
Well, As a spoiler alert, Yun Qianming didn't write this Song Dynasty poem
Oh,
because it's
that's
like
true.
1,000 years old.
But he
And
might
this
have
has
picked
been
it.
like, yeah, but it's been like a theme of a lot of Chinese, and probably, well, not to get too deep into Chinese history on a Thursday night, but the late Tang Dynasty and the Song Dynasty produced tens and hundreds of thousands of poems. And right now, they're Chinese poems. But at the time that they were written, they were poetry.
Hmm.
And you can maybe think about that. That's how large that cultural sphere was. And so to see the same story coming out, I wouldn't give all that much credit to this author. I think it's been a pretty popular theme. I did appreciate the historical references, though. It's definitely a very rich book.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like much else, like Liu Cixin probably is also a student of history and
Right. Don't we
Chinese
talk about
culture.
like the Cold War in this section and the Russian guy
Yeah.
Frank?
Yeah, I mean, he's a student of many subjects, and I'm sure he probably maybe I'm guessing that these stuff is like he learned in school or something, and like stuck in his mind, and kind of informed his writing style. Maybe in the beginning he didn't care about characters, but he definitely in this book I think does care about characters, and like maybe he was influenced by this kind of poetry. So maybe it wasn't Yuan Ming, right? Copying this, or citing this verse, right? But it was Liu Cixin kind of making that a foreshadowing of what's going to happen later on in the story.
In Australia and beyond.
And speaking of foreshadowing, I found another quote that I thought was full of foreshadowing, which was, the beautiful world revealed its fragility to Chengxin, like a lovely soap bubble floating through a bramble bush. A single touch was enough to destroy everything. So soap bubbles become very big idea and big concept in the fairy tale. So I am beyond excited to get to the fairy tale chapter. I'm interested to see what other people, non-spoil people, think about that chapter, because I'm just totally into it.
What is the fairy tale chapter? You don't have to spoil the whole thing for me, but just
I think it'd be almost impossible for to spoil it, but basically Yuan Ming's like coded warning and information dump to Chengxin. When like we talked about, they kind of talk over like this comlink or whatever. Like it's not a person, but it's like they talk to each other. It's like wrapped in like this super metaphorical fairy tale, and the greatest thing about it is that like humanity, like the book kind of focuses on humanity trying to decipher this fairy tale, and trying to figure out like what Yuan Ming is trying to tell us via it, and like how we can save ourselves. Because it's I would not do it justice.
Yeah, you would not. No, none of us could. But he's not allowed to give her strategic intelligence, is I think crucial to understanding. So
right.
He tells her this seemingly innocuous story, and that's the storytell chapter.
I see.
Yeah, he says in the beginning, like, oh, remember we used to tell the fairy tale to each other. We used to make them up when we were kids, even though they didn't know each other when they're kids, but the Tricentenarians don't know that. And he says, well, we'll just, since we can't really talk about anything strategic, we'll just talk about that. We'll just talk about these fairy tales. And so it's like super wrapped into like all these like this metaphors and this dual and triple layer metaphors, and there's like bearing coordinates, and it's like a science, it's a sci-fi interpretation of how to read the metaphors. I guess it's I couldn't do it justice by talking about it, but it's like 3 whole chapters in the book, and it's great.
I will say this chapter that we just read is so full of a lot of other things. I think you could almost miss that it has like another dark forest level secret hidden in just this chapter. And it's another reason this is one of my favorite segments of the book. It's this Guan Yifen, the cosmologist, who's aboard Gravity and observing the universe around him. If you remember, he says that he is saying like the known universe is 16 billion light years across, and it's this 3 in 3,000 problem. The speed of light is comparatively really slow. It's like 300,000 kilometers per second. So light can never go from one end of the 16 billion light year size of a universe to the other. So nothing can really communicate with the other side of the universe. If this were a person, he would have paraplegia. And this whole idea of the universe as a corpse or damaged in this really crucial way is as big a reveal about the nature of the universe as I believe like the Dark Forest was.
In a very superficial kind of observation, I didn't remember Guan Yifan having like this giant beard, and like they talk about him being really scraggly and like disheveled, And I was like, that's not how I pictured him at all. I don't know why I didn't pick it up, because like, he's the one that shows up later. Like I
feel like men in space are probably just like men at sea. Like they probably all have beards. Who's going to be bothered to shave?
I think all the current era men probably do, right? Because they're all feminized and stuff. So,
well, I hope they change it in the movie.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that, did you have any thoughts around like what Leo Shishin is trying to say here by saying humanity like that has become a lot more feminized, and and like it's hard to tell apart like the males and females now? Do you have any thoughts there of like what he's trying to represent?
I had two theories on this. One was that the author is commenting on the current state of the world when he was writing this. So I don't know when he was writing this, 2010-ish, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing was, I was thinking evolutionarily, do the differences between the genders become less pronounced over time? So the men become more, quote, feminine, and the women become, quote, more masculine, although he didn't talk about the other half of things. But so, and he doesn't actually talk about this. That was just one of the things I was wondering evolutionarily if that's something that could happen in hundreds or thousands of years if humans are still around then.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be just the nature of politics and the acceptance of that kind of stuff too. Because like already, like from 10 years ago, even from where we were 10 years ago, like there's a lot more acceptance of like just not straight binary male and female people. And so like this more now, it's like more accepted that there's a spectrum, right, of gender. And so maybe like extrapolating that into the future, like the humanity just eventually evolves into the place where it's like everyone they understand like whatever people want to be, and everyone kind of just like shifts over to the more feminine side of things. I'm not sure that that's what he's going after.
Yeah, I mean, Amin is definitely right that he's commenting on the world around him, because Chung Shin, I think, explicitly talks about Asian pop bands like from her own time, and I was like, oh, he means K-pop.
Right, right.
The fact that they wear eyeliner. But maybe I don't know if he's successful at this, but it seems that he's trying to draw an association between the fashion trends that we think of as like, oh, they're coincidental, they come from art, and art is always changing. Actually, no, like the 1920s and 30s, where we start to see short hair in men. Well, a lot of men went off to war and had to cut their hair, and maybe they came back, and a lot of people started having short hair, and no kind of conflict or any battle or fear has been happening. And so maybe in its absence, he's trying to say, masculinity is not serving a big purpose anymore. Again, I don't know if he was totally successful, but it seemed to me that that's what he was trying to say.
But then we contrast that with like the common era men who are there, and like they're like the getting stuff done guys, right?
Yeah, and exactly. They're relics from a past age.
Right. And just the differences in like opinions on their attractiveness, right? Because Chung seems to be attracted to, or at least thinks that the common era men are more attractive, and AA does not seem to be. Thinks they're like just like Neanderthals, right?
I think Victorian men wore dresses that might not be super attractive to a woman in 2021.
Right, yeah. People, some guy walking down the road, like, powdered face and a wig.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Right.
And weren't high heels originally worn by men to help them when they were riding horses?
Exactly.
Were they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're like riding shoes. They weren't stilettos, but they were like a raised heel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guessed.
Thanks for listening. Leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter @rehydratepod. And please join us next episode for Season 5, Episode 3, Australia, the second half of Part 2 of Death's End by Lucy Shin.